Hello, and welcome back to Open Door Philanthropy. I'm your host, Dave Moss, founder of the Unfunded List, and the host of this podcast. Thanks for listening. We are interviewing Emily Rasmussen. Rasmussen?
That's it.
I've pronounced it correctly. One for one so far. And we're going to dive into it, learn a little bit more about Emily. Where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
Thank you for having me, Dave. To get started, I grew up in Northern California in the mountains, a small town called Sierra City, about 100 people, I believe. And
100 people.
100 people. And actually, to be
Sierra
fair,
City?
Sierra City, Northern California. And honestly, we actually grew up 5 miles away from Sierra City, further removed, but that's the nearest town. So
It has 100 people and it's called a city?
That's correct.
Did it used to be bigger?
It was larger during the gold rush time, so yes.
It's
it
a
was
boom town?
At some point it must have been booming. I'm not sure what booming for Sierra City meant, but
They went there for the gold rush?
yes.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And what did you do there? Did you climb those mountains?
We did a lot of hiking and fishing and swimming in the lakes and all of that good stuff, but yeah, grew up there, homeschooled. My parents built a log cabin in the mountains to raise their 2 kids, and so my brother and I grew up with a pretty wonderful outdoorsy life up there.
And you were homeschooled from the start?
No, we went to school through through 6th grade, excuse me, and then we were homeschooled onward.
So for me, that would have been junior high school and high school?
That's right, 7th grade. Yeah, I think for most people, middle school, high school.
And so that was your parents?
Yes.
All right. Is that, so we have some homeschooling in Maine, and I had some friends who did that. I imagine it's different in California. Was there a certain, was there a curriculum or a program your parents were following? Most of the folks I know who were homeschooled, it was just evangelical or Baptist homeschooling, extremely religious.
Right.
Is that what you were doing?
No. So our form of homeschooling was what my mom called unschooling, which meant there was no formal training.
I am familiar with unschooling.
Oh, yes? Okay.
I used to work at the National Youth Rights Association.
Okay.
And several times we defended students' and parents' rights to unschool or non-school.
Wonderful. Well, we were in California where that was allowed. Other states, not so much. And my mom was a librarian, and so her approach to
what would she know about education?
Well, all she did was bring home books. She said, "What are you interested in?" She'd go to the library.
What qualifies her to? That's very cool.
Yeah.
At a public library?
Yes, at a public library.
Was it a Carnegie library?
It was. I am not sure.
Probably, I guess. He built 3,500.
I would assume so.
He built 3,500 libraries.
Yes, she's a big fan. The library that she worked at up there was the tiny Sierra City Library. Remember, a town of 100 people. So I'm not quite sure how that one was established, but she went on to work at many libraries after that as well.
Very cool. And so eventually you went to college after your homeschooling, right? Did you get a diploma? Did the state of California at some point accredited you?
I did get my GED. And I primarily went that route because I also became involved in ballet. And so before going on to undergrad and going to college, I spent several years as a professional ballet dancer. Lived in Seattle and danced with Pacific Northwest Ballet there.
Very good. When did you start ballet?
I was about 11, I think. Right around the time we started homeschooling was when I was actually able to start training, because we were able to get into town soon enough for classes, where when I was in school we weren't able to make that trip. So
do you suppose that the unschooling model afforded you more time than a normally schooled student would have to practice your dance?
Absolutely.
And that's why you were able to, you said you were a professional?
Yes.
Do you still dance?
I do. I took class last weekend.
Oh, you took class?
Took class.
So you're taking classes. You were a professional,
yes.
And you're still taking...
Oh,
ballerinas just keep taking classes. Is it ballerina or is it ballet dancer now? I've heard people saying
both.
Ballet dancer lately.
Yes, I would say that's more typically used than ballerina.
So I took 3 years of ballet.
Okay.
I was a theater major, and one of my professors thought it would improve my stage presence.
Did it?
He was, yes. Some directors will use ballet terms, like when they're doing their blocking and stuff. And I remember I did do a show, and the guy kept telling me like to stand in third position, fifth position. And at one point he said, "Can you do arabesque?" And I was like, "Listen, man, you need to start speaking English."
My French is not so good.
I actually knew what arabesque meant, but I was like, I don't think he wants me to do that. I can now do. This is a podcast. I would do it for the folks listening, but I can do arabesque still, and I can do changement.
Well, I'm here. I can take a photo and we can share it with the audience.
No, it's not anything that anyone wants. Honestly, I think I'm a little bit too heavy to be doing that kind of stuff these days. Which is something that when I was taking ballet, the ballet instructors reminded me of on like a regular basis.
They are good at that. Yeah, they're pretty good at breaking people down traditionally. There's been a kind of a culture of that in ballet that has not been super healthy. But I think a lot of that's changing now, which has been really great to see.
I went to Dickinson College where they have Central Pennsylvania Youth Ballet.
Yes,
as I understand,
fantastic.
It's one of the better ballet schools.
Absolutely.
And when I took intro or whatever, it was so girls come from all over the world. There were girls from Russia in Central Pennsylvania taking ballet there, and I was in a class with like 12, 13-year-old girls, and watching the instructor like tell them they were too heavy, and I'm like, she's the size of my forearm.
It's a whole other level. Yeah.
And then there was also my pants were never tight enough. It's a whole like thing. I'm just trying to get some credits in the theater department. I don't know why we're talking about my pants this often. They need to see the lines in order to judge if you're doing the positions correctly. That's
there's a whole culture and a whole aesthetic and all of this that's associated with it that is not in and of itself negative, but the execution of it and the education around it is not always done.
Do you think
with care.
There's an awful lot of, not an awful lot, but there's some discussion of toxicity in the world today. It's a thing that people are, there's toxic masculinity and toxic culture and lots of them. The word toxic will come up a lot. Right? People get canceled for being toxic, right? I think ballet, we've both experienced some toxic stuff in it.
Yes.
Right? I think we would both agree you shouldn't cancel it over that. We've reviewed at Unfunded List lots of proposals from newer dance companies trying to be more inclusive and move past this. And I've seen overweight ballet dancers do incredible performances. There's really no reason for what our instructors were telling us, I don't think. There's a very specific and narrow type of dance that is not accessible to a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are very thin. Still.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's living in New York. I've lost like 10 pounds since I've been here.
Yeah, there's a lot of running around, and I live up a walk up, so
I
get that
sit
every day.
Lots of stairs. There's stairs. For a city with a lot of elevators, there's also a lot of stairs.
Yes. And the elevators are always positioned somewhere out of reach, too much of a pain to get to.
So, how did you learn about giving? What was the first time? When was the first time you learned about giving things?
Giving things beyond giving money, just giving. My mom, when she started at the library, for example, she was a volunteer. So she used to talk about volunteering and would work at not just at the library, but would find other ways to do that. Whether we were in a small community, right? So there would be these community events, for example, that would raise money for the local fill in the blank. And so she would always volunteer to go help with the pancake breakfast or whatever the event was. So I think it was just very much something that was modeled for us through action and through that kind of volunteering more than money. We didn't have money growing up.
Well, most children don't have money, even if their parents have money.
Exactly.
Don't. So usually your first experience with giving is something else.
Right.
I ask most folks who come on the show, and it's sharing their toy or, like you just said, volunteering. Did you volunteer at the pancake breakfast?
I remember volunteering, yeah. We volunteered at the library, helped out there. And then my grandmother also lived in the area, and she would be involved in things and have us volunteer also. So I remember doing that. again, not really on the money side of things, but that was actually an interesting experience for me because my first memory of giving money was also as a kid, but maybe, gosh, I don't know, 6 or 8 or something like this. And I remember getting a mailer from, I believe it was the AWCA, and
The AWCA.
is that, sorry, the ASPCA.
ASPCA.
The
The American
ASPCA.
Society for the Prevention of Cruelty Against
To
Animals.
animals, exactly. And I had never heard of them before, and I was very moved by this mailer. And somehow, maybe it probably didn't come to me, to be honest. It probably went to my mother or my grandmother,
Probably
whoever
had
it was.
pictures of pets in it.
Yes, of
Looking
course.
sad.
Looking very sad. And I was very moved as a young child. And I actually went on at 11 to become a vegetarian from all of this. But initially, it was about funding, right? They were asking for money. And I remember taking my coins. I literally had nickels and dimes. Maybe I had a quarter or two in there and putting it in this little envelope and mailing it. And that was my first experience. So it really wasn't through family giving. And I actually remember a healthy skepticism around giving in my family beyond volunteering and doing things directly in the community. There's more of a skepticism of sending your money away to a nonprofit. So that was kind of an interesting thing for me to unpack a bit as I got more involved in that space over time.
Sending your money away to a outside of the community nonprofit.
That's right.
I think that's quite common. A lot of giving is local.
Mm-hmm.
As we were talking before the show, for a long time, giving was primarily organized through religious institutions.
Mm-hmm.
In the city, in what was it, Sierra City?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is there much religion there? They have a church
There is
for the
some.
100 folks.
Yep.
Do they all go to the same church?
I can't say for sure. I did not go to church.
You didn't go to any of them?
I did not. But there is a church in Sierra City, and there's another town, another 10 or 12 miles away called Downeyville, which was a larger town that had the school that we did go to for a while. And that town had a couple of churches, a Catholic church and another Christian church as well. Maybe more, but at least those two that I know of.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, even for those of us, so I grew up in a Catholic town, but I was not Catholic. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you get to be immune from traditional Catholic values, or because everybody around you is thinking and talking about them often. Mm-hmm. Right, so, what effect did religiosity have on you as a child growing up?
Well, my family was not religious, as I mentioned, so we did not go to church. And there wasn't a whole lot of conversation about church or faith, religion that I remember much of. I did have one friend I recall whose mother was very religious, and so when I would go over to her home, there was a lot more conversation about it. So I guess my take on it was just that it was something interesting, but it was not something that I internalized or fully, I don't know, understood, I guess, in any way.
For many folks, the church is a very welcoming place.
Mm-hmm.
I think folks in my hometown might say that the Catholic church they go to is where they feel the most welcome. And one of the things I think a lot of folks don't realize is that, for me, who's also from that town, that would probably be the place I would feel the least welcome in my hometown.
Interesting.
Because it's a community within the community.
Yeah.
That gets to exclude community members. Communities should be able to exclude people, right? It's sort of the nature of having a community.
Yeah.
But when you've got communities that exclude people who are in your community, right? That's where I think trouble starts, and that's where I think many Americans, particularly our age, have a negative view of religion. And for me, that's why it is.
That's interesting. And I will say that I remember going into the church often and it being a very welcoming place because there were, for example, the local theater group would perform in the church. And so it felt like very much a community space. And I would think I was too young to really understand faith and all of the implications around it. But my exposure to it in those those few times was very positive, just as far as it being a community space. But yeah.
They are often involved in social change work, even sometimes social justice work. For all, I will criticize the Catholic Church because I grew up surrounded by them, and I think I've earned the right. But they have also done an awful lot of good stuff for social justice in my community and many others.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that I find difficult about it is currently they are on the flight. We have a small homelessness problem in Waterville, Maine, where I live, compared to New York City, where I am right now. Honestly, it's actually similarly visible. Like our 10 homeless people are about as visible as whatever the percentage is here. Right? The folks from Waterville are used to there being 0 homeless folks, and now there are 10. I don't know. I haven't done a head count. But they have they have their tents set up down by the river, and a lot of folks are concerned. And we have a Goodwill and a Habitat for Humanity, both have chapters in Waterville, and as far as I can tell, doing great chapters of 2 great organizations. You do have a lot of the Catholics that will not engage with those 2 organizations and are instead trying to help the homeless only through their church, which is something that I find very frustrating. I also would like to help on certain issues in this town, and I can do so through Goodwill or Habitat for Humanity. I can't really go to the Catholic Church and participate in it that way. And there are even some churches that are competitive with each other. Don't bring your donations to that church, bring your donations to this church. And it's just that stuff. They need to keep their membership up. They need lots of other things. They're thinking existentially, while also trying to help their community. But the fact that they are, exclusive in certain ways makes it difficult to accomplish that social change, I've found. I warned you before that I sometimes go on tangents.
Yeah.
Do you have homeless in Sierra City? It's probably warmer in the winter.
I can say I have never seen someone that I recognized as a person experiencing homelessness in Sierra City. It doesn't mean that they have not been there.
Right. Yes, it's not always as visible as.
It's also it is a mountain town. It's a pretty difficult place to be homeless. Beyond the summer, there are about 2 months where it's lovely.
Everywhere in Maine is pretty rough. It's one of the reasons why I think people are so concerned because winter is coming up, and we don't always have enough warming shelters. Okay, we are moving through your life. Eventually, you completed your homeschooling, and you have your GED, and you're leaving the Sierra. You left the Sierra City area to go to college. Where do you go to college?
Well, I left first to train for ballet. So I went to train actually in New York for a summer, in San Francisco for a summer, and then Seattle. And then ultimately moved to Seattle when I was 17, full-time to train with the Pacific Northwest Ballet and dance there for a couple, 2 or 3 years.
And then, so at some point you stopped dancing and went to college?
Yeah, so then what happened was I ended up having an injury, had to have surgery, so that took me out of dance for a while. Right around that time, 9/11 happened, and that really, especially going through that surgery and having more time, just had me thinking about other things going on in the world and other things I might want to do with my life. And I always felt that I wanted to go to college at some point, but at least at that point in time in the ballet world, it was very difficult to do those 2 things simultaneously. And it was even kind of frowned upon. If you were going to dance or going to college or doing something outside of ballet, then you weren't serious enough about ballet. So it felt very much like you had to be all in, and that moment freed me up to explore some other things. And while I would have, I think, imagined myself being in the ballet world for quite a bit longer before making that transition, this all expedited it. So ended up applying to some colleges during that time, as well as getting back in shape and doing some auditions, and ultimately got accepted to Occidental College, where I was really excited because they had an internship program with the United Nations. And at least at that time, it was the only internship program, undergraduate internship program with the UN that I was aware of. So I was excited to go there to be able to participate in that.
I think those sorts of internship or experiential programs at colleges have been growing quite a bit since we went to school, which is sometimes I think I just graduated, and then I do the math out and realize that it was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
You could get maybe an internship or something like that, but it does seem to me that like almost every school now has like vast levels of program and are talking about maybe social change or social entrepreneurship. I remember when I first moved to DC, GW, like the first year I was there, they founded the first department of social entrepreneurship of any like undergrad program. It was mostly because students were like, I'm interested in this. You need to have something called, you need to use the word social entrepreneurship in something.
Yeah.
And now almost all of them are using that word in something.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to me, right? When I went to Dickinson College, I wanted to have I think a lot of folks at the time, I went in 2000, so I was in college for 9/11. I was mostly just interested in a typical college experience. I wanted to go to college. My parents were college professors, so I was obviously good. Like there was no discussion of not going. And like I grew up in Waterville, where Colby College is, so I got to see that. I wanted to go to a college like that. That was my really my main driver. It's interesting, and I wasn't thinking about my career, the UN, or anything like that. I knew I figured I was talented and I would someday get a job somewhere. I was smart enough that somebody would want to hire me, and I just needed I was going to have the opportunity to go to college for 4 years and have some fun. Going because you're interested in a UN internship seems mature.
Yeah. Well, I was also a little bit older because I'd been dancing for a while, right? So I remember starting school, and my peers from an age perspective were all seniors when I was a freshman. So I think I did go in with quite a bit more life experience and more focus on what I wanted to get out of my time there.
And how was did you do the UN internship?
I did, yeah.
And what did they have you do?
It was great. I ended up interning with the Finnish mission to the United Nations. And it was during the time that Finland had the presidency of the EU. So they basically were overwhelmed with the work of that. I think I can't quite recall, but I believe they rotate this presidency between the countries.
I can't remember the guy's name. He had a great name. The Finnish. I'll have to look it up later.
Okay. But it was an exciting time because they had so much going on, and they basically doubled their capacity. They had desks in the hallways and just so much activity going on. There was a lot to lean into, and it was also around the time that Muhammad Yunus was being recognized for his work with microfinance. And so for me, that tied into my broader focus on economic development and international affairs. And so I spent a lot of time working on those areas there. And that ultimately led to my next phase of getting involved in the microfinance space.
We are... coincidentally, one of the proposals we are reviewing this round was submitted to the Finnish embassy in Addis Ababa.
Oh.
Which is, and I was like I'm like, I don't know anything about any of that.
Well, we should chat.
I'll be able to get this. Like, I have volunteers, and some of them will know about it, but like, I'm not Finnish. I don't know about embassies. I don't. It is it's fun we have a very diverse batch of proposals we're reviewing this round, which is very interesting. And I imagine that the UN has some of these folks applied actually to the UN from this round as well. But when you go to a place like the UN, you get exposure to all kinds of stuff that you might never think about, like the Finnish government funding in Ethiopia. Like that's it. And especially as an American to think about that. They're doing this without us. They're just going about their diplomacy and giving grants and stuff. But actually, the Scandinavian countries give a fairly good percentage in foreign aid. I know there's NorAid in Norway, and I forget what the Finnish agency is. But that must have been very cool.
It was a great experience, yeah.
So when you were, and then after Occidental, you went to Harvard, right?
I did.
Was
well,
that
I
right
worked.
away, or
no, I worked
and
for
then
a few years. So I moved during my senior year in undergrad, I did a senior thesis on microfinance and arts and culture in India. And so for that work, I spent about 10 days in India going to visit different microfinance organizations. And had a really interesting, challenging, but also enjoyable educational experience there. And ultimately, out of that, was offered a position at one of these microfinance institutions after I graduated. So I moved to India a couple months after graduating and spent over 2 years, I think about 2.5 years in India, working in microfinance, based out of New Delhi area, but a lot of the work that we were doing was in the rural Northeast. So spent a lot of time in the smaller villages in those areas.
Cool.
Yeah, it was a great experience.
For those who may not know, this might include me, what is microfinance?
Microfinance is giving small
Very
dollar,
small, very tiny finance.
micro, you might say.
Little, micro means 1/1000th. So you finance 1/1000th of the program.
Not exactly, but you could. Maybe there is some version of that. That there are many different models of
Because I think you should
microfinance.
fund the full program,
Right?
personally.
Okay. Well, if the program only requires $5, then maybe that's microfinance. It's the full program, but it's a micro amount of funding. I think that's typically in the microfinance world. The idea was, so Muhammad Yunus is really considered the godfather of microfinance.
I've heard of him.
Great. So Grameen Bank, he founded in Bangladesh, and this really pioneered this movement. And he was a professor himself, I believe, and had started this just experiment on his own where he would give money to people in communities that needed it, and would say, well, I'll give money to someone else once this money is repaid. And so I won't get into the specifics because I don't know all the details around it, but he really just started testing this concept of all these people in these communities that could use financing, whether it's to address an immediate need, a healthcare issue, or something that comes up, or invest in their small local business. A lot of these people were not considered bankable by the traditional banking industry. They didn't have bank accounts. They couldn't even get to a bank in some cases, so they didn't have access to finance. Kind of middlemen industries had popped up, of course, but often those were prohibitively expensive, to where if you took any kind of financing from them, it could completely destroy you economically. And so he started testing this concept of, instead of having financial capital or some of the collateral, or some of the other types of ways that banks would make loans to people because they had some way of ensuring that it would be repaid. He said, what if we thought about social capital and social collateral as a way to give people loans and say, hey, if you put together a self-help group of women, of 20 women, we'll give a loan to one of them, and once she repays it, then the next woman in the group can get a loan. And in that way, other people in the group are incentivized to encourage that woman to pay back her loan so that they can also get a loan. And so anyway, that started this whole new movement of how we can think about alternative forms of collateral and getting funding to communities that typically wouldn't have access to it otherwise.
Thank you for the explanation. Something that has confused me for a long time, and I remain confused. It's one of the reasons I started Unfunded List. Maybe someday I would figure it out. There are many things that, particularly, so like if you go to an area of the world where there is a lot of need, right, or what I would call an unfunded topic, right? So this could be pretty much anything. This could be like black women-owned businesses in the U.S. don't get the funding that they need. Indigenous groups in the U.S. and abroad. Actually, one of the things that's interesting to me is that U.S. foundations fund more to indigenous groups abroad than to indigenous groups in the U.S.
Really? Wow.
And a lot of that has to do with what you were talking about: no bank account, not the correct 501c3 paperwork, or whatever, right? And so my grandmother was somewhat of a philanthropist, and one of the things that she would say is like, giving money is not difficult. You give the money to them and then they have it. When she was giving, it was usually handing or mailing a check, like the very clear-cut process that she understood. These days, money goes. Sometimes the donor hands you a check. That hasn't happened to me as a fundraiser in quite some time. Sometimes they come in the mail, and who knows if they arrive at all. Other times you need to get onto their platform and get signed up. Unfunded List is on many different platforms in order to be able to receive donations from certain folks, right? And I think for a very long time we've been talking about like getting money to the folks who need it as though it's very difficult.
Yeah.
right? So these and but there is such a thing as financing and banking, and for a very long time, investing in small businesses, community-based small businesses, has been a winning bet for investors. So and as everything I've read about microfinance says that's true abroad as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So why isn't this just a solution for traditional banking to make traditional loans to businesses in a way that has been working in growing economies around the world for hundreds of years?
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is that this initial model that he pioneered, Muhammad Yunus pioneered, has gone on to inspire many other models, and including many banks that have gotten into this space. And I think to varying levels of what's the word I'm looking for? Success, I guess, depending upon how you look at success. So there are some that would say traditional banking sectors, they've gotten into this microfinance movement, have tried to extract too much value. And so where Muhammad Yunus was running a nonprofit and his approach was very charitable, there were others who came into the sector that said, well, actually there is an opportunity here to charge something, and there is expense as we scale this up and we build a team. We were talking about overhead earlier, right? There's just real overhead expense for us to administer a program like this. This can be a sustainable program, and if we demonstrate that, then that's going to inspire more of these programs across the country, around the world, and ultimately that's going to be better. That's going to help many more communities. And so I think there is a push toward that direction, and then some who others would say push that too far, and we're trying to extract much more value than they should have. Regardless, I think it really did inspire a lot of these banks to get into that space, and I think in a way that's what the nonprofit sector is here to do, right? Is to like run these experiments and show what's possible, and whether it's kind of company or the government, then learning from that and adopting that and helping to scale that. That is ultimately, I think, the hope for a lot of these types of programs.
Since Yunus started his work with Grameen, and they have an office in DC, and I shared a building with them, and I would occasionally see him, but I've never actually met him. I saw him in the lobby a few times. Has there been an increase in the amount of funding that goes to typical Grameen recipients?
I cannot speak to their metrics at this point, unfortunately.
Sure.
I'm not up to speed on everything on the movement more generally, since I've been out of it for
Sure. So
quite a while
I'll ask
now.
a slightly different version. So like I said, one of the things I'm confused about is you see a lot of folks talking. There are many problems that have been identified in philanthropy long ago, and I watch year after year people just continue to talk about the problems, and some of them, like, so for instance, very small percentage goes to, this is the one that continuously confuses me. We've been talking about the fact that funding doesn't go to black and brown leaders in the U.S. for a very long time, and the percentage is not going up. The talk does not translate to it going up, and in fact, there are programs focused on. There's programs where you have to be a black leader to apply, which is not something that existed all that long ago. And even with those programs in existence, the percentage is still not going up. And it's one of the reasons why I hesitate to say I'm an expert on philanthropy, because I'm bewildered by it. Give them more money.
Right.
And they're like, well, we can't, it's hard to, do you need a list? I've reviewed well over 1,000 proposals since 2015. Many of them were written by really great black and brown leaders who have not gotten a grant from anybody. I recently saw the head of Ford Foundation giving a talk, who himself grew up poor, black, and gay, and has a focus on trying to increase that percentage. And in the talk, he admitted that in his time there at Ford, they have not increased that percentage. And so, and again, I don't know.
Why? Right.
I'm not trying. Sometimes with my tangents, I have like a theory, or like I think I know what I'm talking about here, but I really don't know. And I've never been to India. I've never done microfinance work. I've never been into sort of this stuff. So we have some other things that we can get into as we go along with the questions here. But like, is it just really is philanthropy just really hard to make change in, or like is systemic inequality too difficult to encounter? Because again, to me, this seems simple.
Right.
You're funding the wrong things in many cases. You just need to stop and fund the right things.
Right. Well, especially when you hear someone like the head of the Ford Foundation saying this is a goal, and it's, okay, well, you have lots of money. You could change the funding dynamic right there.
And I don't want to give the guy a hard time.
No, and they
He's
have their
doing a
own
lot
structure.
better than a lot of other
Yeah.
folks. And I appreciate that he's admitting that they couldn't do it. And they're actually a lot more. When I started on Funded List, I don't think he was the head, because I tried to call them and ask how many, because they used to accept full length proposals from anybody. They don't now. It's like a letter of inquiry. It's only like 2 short questions. It's a lot less time. There used to be like a full 40 hours to write grant proposal that you could send in there. It was the largest open process in the world.
Wow.
And I tried to get information on how many they received, and they would not tell me, because it was, I'm sure, an embarrassingly
Massive.
high number
Yeah.
and if you were to do the math on it, 40 hours times the 40,000 proposals would be my guess.
Yeah.
Similar programs you would compare it to. You start paying them minimum wage to write those proposals. It's actually more money than the Ford Foundation gives away every year.
Wow.
And there's some other programs, so like Echoing Green, you may have heard of.
Yeah, of course.
They don't actually give that much money away every year.
Right.
And they're getting applications in the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
I've done it myself a few times.
Yeah.
Twice rejected
Me as well.
Echoing Green.
Can join you on that list.
I wrote a blog post several years ago. I interviewed people who had been denied by Echoing Green but successful with their ventures. Which because it's most people, it's 99.999999% of the people who apply to Echoing Green. And again, pay minimum wage to the people for just the time it took them to write the proposal. And it would exceed. It's called net granting. Folks call the math on that. And there are many programs that are actually net negatives as a result. The administrative difficulty there is, I think, a suggestion as to why perhaps funding is not increasing to some of these groups.
Right. I think that's right. We're hamstrung a bit by the infrastructure that we have, and a lot of these older institutions as well have been set up in certain ways that precludes those people who are running them now, right? And so you're trying to move a much larger ship and things take longer, but ultimately over time, I think the idea, the goal, the hope is that there will be a much bigger impact and there will be a bigger shift of funding. But it is also one of the reasons why some of these alternative models of funding, I'm obviously, I work in the Giving Circle space, and most Giving Circles don't ask for applications. They try to not even engage with the nonprofit until they're telling the nonprofit they have money for them. And that's part of it.
That's
because
interesting. Every Giving Circle I've been involved with did ask for applications. That's interesting for me to hear. And I would say the application part of it, some of the Grapevine materials I read, you use the word administrative burden, which I appreciate. It's a term I use a lot. The fundamental problem with philanthropy is the administrative burden. It's wonderful and nice to think about giving the money away, and when you actually start to do it, you realize this is work. This is schoolwork.
Yeah.
There's spreadsheets and budgets and stuff to read, and things to learn and look up, and numbers to double check, and it's work, and it takes a long time. Program officers who work at foundations are some of the hardest working people I know.
Agreed.
They have to read a lot of different programs. Most of them they have to turn down, and they have to do so with diligence. Usually, if you're doing it professionally, right, it's not even your own opinion. You have to follow like some sort of matrix or rubric that's been explained to you. Right? Very difficult work that often goes unappreciated. But not right now. I appreciate you, program. Even when you reject my grants.
Yeah, it's a
I
tough position to be in.
appreciate the time that you have put into it, and certainly I wouldn't blame a program officer for rejecting my grant. They're doing their jobs. So we've been bouncing around a little bit. I want a couple more questions about education. I've been privileged to interview many Harvard graduates on the program. My uncle, like you, has an MBA from Harvard, and he did well with it.
Great.
Sort of. Not as well as my mother.
But who's counting?
He does not listen to the podcast, so I can get away with that kind of stuff. So you obviously were interested in ballet during your high school years. Once you got to school, what were you interested in studying? What sort of classes? And did you major in the arts?
I did not.
Undergrad?
No, I was actually very clear that for me going to college was not
business?
Pursuing the arts. Well, it wasn't business. You mean, well, in business school, yes, it was business.
I just meant generally like business. I didn't necessarily mean you were majoring in business or anything, but you were taking I guess arts. I don't know. Arts are business and serious. So I'm trying to think of what's like you had a non-artistic.
Yes, I wanted to
More
pursue academics.
practical,
Yes.
I guess.
I felt that I pursued ballet, and that was my passion in the art world. And if I wasn't going to pursue that seriously, which meant through the apprenticeship model with the company in that channel, then I wasn't going to go to college for it. Certainly, there was nothing in college was going to teach me about ballet. It was my feeling. Now, there are certainly people that go to college to study ballet, but it's just a very different model from the one that I had bought into and wanted to pursue. So when I made the change to go to college, had nothing to do with the arts. It had everything to do with international relations and ultimately,
You mentioned the UN,
exactly, and ultimately the economic development. I got into that side of things as well through that interest in microfinance. And to your point earlier, social entrepreneurship. I remember in college discovering Ashoka and reading a book. I believe it was something about, or maybe even called The Seed of Discontent. I can't quite remember. I should look this up. But just the early days of conversation around social enterprise, social entrepreneurs. What does that mean? And that really resonated with me. And I think microfinance became the first very tangible example of that to me when I went to the UN and learned about the model there. And ultimately, it was actually Acumen Fund here in New York that was one of the early impact investors. One of my longtime mentors worked there, and he helped connect me to some microfinance organizations in India to do this research. So that just became the path that opened up to me to explore that social entrepreneurship side of things. And it really resonated with the things that I was interested in around community building and making a difference, I think through community, through connection.
So I have a question here. That is, when and how did you learn about fundraising, nonprofits, and charities? You just mentioned Ashoka, which is not the Disney show, but a well-known nonprofit. I think founded by Bill Drayton, or did he just run it? Yeah, probably he was the founder. He might have coined the term social entrepreneur. Or certainly used it a lot. He emailed me a few times earlier in my career, and when I say that, I mean his assistant wrote his emails for him. He used to get them printed out so he could read them all, and he would write his responses on them, and then she would type the response back, and she would do the little secretarial note at the bottom. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, "What is it?" There's gibberish letters at the bottom of this email, and I had to look it up in the secretarial handbook what was happening.
It's like the modern day version is ChatGPT. Originally, this was ChatGPT.
ChatGPT could take us off on a big tangent. This was the first round at Unfunded List that we received proposals written by ChatGPT, which has been a fairly interesting thing for me.
Yeah, wow.
One of the things so I was told, with in no uncertain terms, that I would not be able to tell the difference between a ChatGPT proposal and one written by a professional grant writer, and that's. Yes, I can tell.
Okay.
Just want to be very clear. I can definitely tell. So can probably most program officers still. They're very interesting, but I mean, especially since I've been to how to write grant proposals with ChatGPT workshops, and I've seen enough examples. I understand how it writes and how it works. And also, usually there's the proposal and then an email from some other writing sample from the author.
Right. You can tell the difference.
If it's wildly different. Right?
Yeah.
Someone's applying from Congo, and I know they don't speak English, and the proposal's in perfect English, right? Those sorts of things. However, I think there is a ton of potential there. Particularly, I was talking about all the time it takes.
Yeah, exactly. The admin overhead.
And certainly, it can take. It's going to be able to help remove some of the time there.
That's great.
But So you've mentioned volunteerism, and you were dancing in the arts, but as a professional, you were getting paid there. There are dance companies where the dancers don't get paid, and I'm an actor. It's my art, and even when I was a professional actor, it's much more of a stipend situation.
Right. You're acting for probably the local nonprofit theater or something.
Well, generally, when I've been paid to do shows, you get paid for the show, but not the 6 weeks of rehearsal and all the other stuff that goes into it. Right. And it's really not one of the things I wish Dickinson had taught me when I was majoring in theater arts was that theater's not a real business. Yeah. And that if I wanted to do it, I needed to learn how to do lights and sound. That's how people get if you want to make money as an actor, You better be really, really good at it.
Yeah.
And even then, it's going to be frustrating. You might end up having to strike every 10 years, something like that. When you were at Occidental and Harvard, how much did you understand about the philanthropy that goes into those places? Those are philanthropic run institutions that receive donations and have 501c3 tax statuses.
Yes.
And are tax exempt organizations. How, and I'll admit I didn't know that much about that aspect of college when I was going to college. And this is, as someone who grew up on a college campus, didn't really understand all of it. I sort of thought, I guess I kind of thought they were like quasi-government because they were schools. But Colby, Harvard, and I believe Occidental are private institutions responsible for their own budgets.
Right.
How much of that did you understand when you were going to school?
I had some sense of it because I was a recipient of scholarships. And I think at both Occidental and
very
HBS,
expensive if you weren't.
Yeah. Exactly. Still very expensive, but and I think both of those schools also made a point of connecting you to the donor who was making your scholarship possible. And so building that direct connection, either whether you're meeting on occasion at a luncheon or something that they're hosting for everyone to thank donors, and
you as a scholarship recipient were invited to donor events.
Yes, there were, I'm sure not all of them, of course, but there were donor events where they would bring the scholarship recipients together with the donors who had made the scholarships available. And they took some interest in your progress and what you were interested in and knew that they were directly funding your scholarship to go to school. So through that experience, I had more of a sense of how
What
things
did you
were
think of
funded.
it? Did you like talking to these folks?
I did, actually.
These were strangers paying for you to go to school.
Yeah, I felt
It seems like it potentially
incredibly
awkward.
grateful. I mean, it could be considered awkward, but
There was no sort of sense of like that you might owe them something.
No, I didn't. I mean,
Not necessarily.
what I
money.
owed them was working hard and not squandering this opportunity. That was something that I felt that had been deeply ingrained in me from dance. So there was no risk of that not happening. It was
at Dickinson. They're always fundraising, like many schools. But I remember when I first got there, they started explaining, and I was lucky. My parents were Colby professors, so Colby paid for me to go to Dickinson.
okay.
The full weight of it. But Dickinson was quick to point out to me that was not the full cost of my being there. So even though it was at the time like one of the highest tuitions in the country, they would like send me these materials showing that like actually it costs this much and I have all these donors to thank, right? And I resented that because right, my parents worked very hard,
Yeah.
and their employer was willing to pay for me to go to school.
Yeah.
And if there's anyone I feel grateful to, it's Colby College for paying for me to go to school. I didn't ask them to undercharge me.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I think that the amount that they were charging is more than enough, and I can do their 990s are public, and I can pull them, and I can do the back of the napkin math on that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does not add up. For instance, so Harvard, where you went, like I said, I've been fortunate to interview several Harvard graduates on the show, and I usually like to talk about that. This is one of the most powerhouse fundraising operations in the known world. They have been fundraising for over 400 years, which is one of the main reasons why they have so much money. How much money, you ask? Would you like to make a guess as to? So I only have figures from last year's tax return.
Okay.
And we can guess that the endowment is in fact probably about 3 to 5% bigger by now. But how much money do you think Harvard has?
I wouldn't even venture a guess.
They have $51 billion.
Wow.
And an operating cost of $5 billion. So they need to make not quite 10% tax-free off their investments, which I think they do. And that would cover their operations costs. Yet they still charge tuition to folks. They still charge. In fact, a lot of colleges are, like one of the things we don't understand about them is that they're like largely real estate businesses. They're just renting out land that they own to people full price and not paying taxes on that land. Like lots of great benefit. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Harvard is providing great value, but we should understand what's going on there.
And this is Harvard University across the board. This isn't Harvard Business School. Is that right?
The Harvard Endowment
Yeah.
consists of 14,000 funds, 70% of which are restricted to specific things like the business school or something else. One of the largest gifts ever in history. Oh man, I should have looked this up. I believe it was Paulson. Is the engineering school at Harvard now called the Paulson School for Engineering? Yeah, okay. So that was, here's the Kennedy School, here's this school. The engineering school is unnamed, and everybody knows these other ones, but the engineering school had won more Nobel Prizes at that point. And they went to Paulson, who didn't even, I don't think he even went to Harvard, and they were like, this is a great opportunity. Give us $400 million. And we will name, now that school is named the Paulson School of Engineering. I actually have I don't think Kennedy gave $400 million. So
I doubt it. But that happened a long time ago, so these things change over time.
It might have been, he would have been able to raise that.
Right.
So I assume that's probably what it happened.
Part of it.
And in fact, Harvard himself, there was a man named Harvard for a long time. And there still are. There's a Harvard law firm somewhere in New York, and it's descendants of Harvard. Bill Harvard is a guy practicing law out there, wearing suits, and guess where he went to school? What does it say? Oh yeah. So right, the with 14,000 funds and $51 billion in various bank accounts. One of the interesting facts about it is the fees they pay to fund managers is more than the cost of undergraduate tuition.
Wow.
The fund managers make more money than undergraduate tuition does.
Yeah.
So do you donate to Harvard or Occidental?
I have, yeah.
So someone with $51 billion says, "Could I please have some money?" And you were
Yeah,
cool with that?
Well, the way, so not exactly that way. So the way that I've become involved in the school, both financially and with my time, my volunteering hours afterward, is I am now on the board of the Harvard Business School Women's Association. And through that work, we actually pool money. So we all give, and we pool money to give back to provide a scholarship for a woman at HBS. And so, yes, through that work, we're both giving back to support women in school, to go to school there, and then we're also building a community of alumni after the fact to support each other. And we have lots of programming and events, educational, networking, other types of events as well to help women after they graduate along with their
It's very interesting
professional careers.
So when I asked about your first experience with giving, it was some key words were so it was your mother, the library and education, right, and volunteering, doing some volunteer hours, right, and then fast forward a few decades, and there you are volunteering to help women, right, get scholarships so they can read books. I like asking that. I think there's often huge connection between our first giving memories and what it is when we're older.
Yeah, it's a nice connection.
As you probably know, most Americans give.
Yes.
Whether it's recorded or not.
Last year, fair enough, whether it's recorded or not.
One of my general criticisms, so I'd like to talk about the Giving USA report.
Yep.
Something I read every year. I generally have I think they do their best. The methodology is difficult. A lot of giving is not giving that you are going to be able to track.
Right.
Particularly so you worked in microfinance, there's remittances.
Right.
We have an increasing number of refugees. As I understand from watching the news, your mayor believes that there's too many coming into the city.
Yep.
And I've been walking around and it's quite crowded out there. I think you might be right. I think they should all move to Maine. We have plenty of space. Actually, we have a long and thriving history of taking in asylees and refugees. And my Waterville has a large Lebanese community from in the 80s when they all came over. And some of those folks are giving back to their families in Lebanon. Actual money in the envelope sent off, right?
Yep.
Or given in ways that are generally not trackable. But a lot of it is easy to track, and it's probably becoming even more to track. And this year's Giving USA report showed a drop in giving, which is very unusual. I believe it's the first time I've seen a drop in giving in my own career as a fundraiser and philanthropist. Just to quote the report, Americans gave 1.7% of their personal disposable income to charity in 2022. That's the lowest level since 1995. I remember it was 2.4% when I first started. My first job as a development assistant at the Seed Foundation. I remember my boss explaining that to me. And I remember him also saying that giving was pretty much always 2% of GDP. Giving's 2% of GDP. There's nothing you can do about it. It never goes up. It never goes down. It's 2% of GDP. And in fact, that's still like, depending on how you look at the numbers, that's sort of what happened in the Giving USA report. But and there's lots of ways you can talk about why they might have less disposable income in 2022, and lots of reasons there. But what do you think? Why are Americans giving less to charity, according to this report?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's so many different reasons and so many different things it could be. Certainly the economic situation is one of them. And I think a lot of people have been cutting back on spend generally. So we tend to see giving also be affected by these broader market dynamics. I do think what we're seeing alongside this decrease in giving through traditional 501c3 nonprofit organizations is an expansion of how people are giving back. So whether they're giving through crowdfunding campaigns, they're giving directly to help someone cover their rent next month. They're doing, as you said, remittances, or many other forms of giving that people are doing that aren't captured in this report. I know Giving Tuesday has been trying to do a broader capture of all different types of giving, a kind of broader state of generosity report. And they've been seeing through that work that generosity is very much up. It's just how we think about being generous and how and where we give is shifting. So my hope is that it's not about a decline in giving so much as an expansion of how we think about giving. And I think that's a good thing. We were talking earlier about the challenges of some of these institutions, some of these legal frameworks, right? And if someone wants to make an impact, often the first thing they think of is, I should start a nonprofit. Well, no, maybe you should go run for office. Maybe you should go start a giving circle. Maybe you should do any number of other things to channel that desire to make a difference. Maybe you should give through other means. So I think it's ultimately a good thing, but I think it's going to be it's going to take some time for our tracking to keep up with.
So it's a good thing.
Well, I think what we're seeing overall is a good thing, which is an increase in generosity and an expansion of how we're giving back.
I'm confused because according to the report, the giving went down. So what's the increase in generosity that you were talking about?
Giving specifically to 501c3 nonprofits went down.
So you think giving overall went up?
I think
we count
so.
all things.
Yes. That's my theory based on some of the indicators we're seeing from other reports.
Some of that might be. So political giving is at an all-time high, absurd levels. Are you familiar with the term? So as a fundraiser in various offices, we would often talk about cannibalization, and it can mean several things. I mean, I think the first time when I was at the Seed Foundation, we were launching a capital campaign. One of the things we were worried about was cannibalizing our annual donors. And actually Harvard probably has similar conversations when they do new capital campaigns.
Right.
So you've got a donor who in their mind is ready to give you his $10,000 gift every year.
Yeah.
Right? And before he gives that, you go to him and you ask for a capital gift. And instead, he makes $10,000 gift to the capital campaign, and then he stops, and he's no longer an annual fund donor. Doesn't do it this year, doesn't do it next year, doesn't do it the year after.
Right.
You've actually taken money out of your program by doing that. I think I've not seen anyone in the news talk about it. They'll talk about fundraising totals going up and up and up. Right? We're looking at it's going to be billions and billions. And that's not that long ago. Like if you look at how much like Bill Clinton raised to run for his reelection compared to what Barack Obama raised to run for his reelection, it doesn't look like it's the same activity. And so you might have someone who was going to give $30 to their local humane society and instead gives $15 to Barack Obama. I think one of my least favorite examples of cannibalism are those folks that stand on the sidewalks with clipboards and ask for donations to nonprofits. I've seen cannibalization is very difficult to prove because it goes into like innate what they were going to do later. Yeah. Which is really hard to capture in a survey because they probably won't admit that they were going to make that larger gift. Right? But we have there is some evidence to show that someone they give $100 to a nonprofit that they like every now and then. They get stopped by somebody on the street and they get asked for money, and maybe it is even the same nonprofit. They'll give right there on the street, but probably less because they're standing there on the street talking to a stranger, not in the privacy of their home, doing it the normal way. Right. And then also that those folks take a little bit off the top to pay the person who's standing there with a clipboard, which is fair, right? And so smaller donation, a little bit off the top, ends up the giving going down. I also think we might be seeing some, right, there's a lot of very positive coverage when very wealthy people make large gifts, particularly Mackenzie Scott.
Yes. Been a lot of that coverage.
The giving is so much, and the coverage is sometimes exaggerated. She's giving a lot. She's being very generous, and I think she's being very thoughtful. I'm a fan when folks hire professionals to give money, which she has done. She's working with some of the best, and there are proposals.
Yeah.
There are proposals now. For a long time, people were telling me that proposals are going away. Mackenzie Scott doesn't read proposals. And I was like, well, we'll see. Right. And currently, it's all about reading proposals over there. In fact, we are reviewing some of the folks that didn't get into the open call this round. But I think some folks might be at home watching that news and say, listen, if she's given, millions of dollars to my favorite charity, I don't need to give my $50. Right. And I'm really worried about the upcoming elections. So I'm going to give it here, or I'm going to give it to my family, or I'm going to give it back to this other country in some other way. Right. As a member of some giving circles, I'll say that I think there's some possibility there as well. I'll give a personal experience. When I first joined the Slingshot Funds Giving Circle, my grandmother was very cheap. She gave $7,500 to participate in the circle back then, and she gave the $7,500. And she said actually very clearly that she was going to give $15,000 to, I forget, something that she normally gives money to, and she did not give it to them. She gave the $7,500 to me, and that's to do this circle. And in her mind, we would be she was giving just as much because the total payout at Slingshot's very large.
Right.
Right, but she was giving less.
Yeah.
Even though maybe the impact was more, which is an arguably true statement. But I've personally seen giving circles contribute to folks giving less. Is there anything we do about cannibalization here at Grapevine?
So it's interesting because, anything that we proactively do, we don't talk about cannibalization or...
it's a scary word.
It is, but...
I would like a better word because I'm not talking about eating people. I want to be clear.
But no, there is something in the giving circle space. So when I do 2 different calls with potential members. So I always spend time, 45 minutes, twice a week, any open kind of office hours, we call them, but anyone who wants to come learn more about the model, the movement, who we are at Grapevine, why we're doing what we're doing. I think it's important for me to be available to people to learn more and to ask their questions and to know that we're real people doing this and, who's behind it. And in those sessions, when I talk about the model, I do talk about the amplification aspect and how powerful that can be when you come together, for example, in a group with 100 other people, everyone donates $100. Now you have a $10,000 check to give away to a nonprofit all at once, right? That's so much more that they can do it, they can plan around, that they can accomplish in that one gift. And I always make sure to say, look, if you're giving $100 here and there to nonprofits throughout the year, that's great, and you should absolutely keep doing that. That is meaningful, that's important. Please keep doing that. But imagine if you did that same thing and you added this collaborative effort where now you can give this one much larger gift at a time as well. That can go so much further, and you can discover so many great organizations, great initiatives in your community that might expand your thinking about your own philanthropy and have trickle-down effects into what you give to and how much you give over time, which is what the research has shown that giving circles can often do. So I always encourage people to keep doing what they're doing and do this in addition. And we also have seen in the research that giving circles tend to be a way in which people give as part of their total portfolio, not the only way that they give. And so we also often talk about that this is a piece of your giving portfolio, and it has a specific place and role to play, but all the other things do as well.
Yes, excellent. So I think, to go back to my grandmother's example, This did give many organizations the opportunity to get on her radar that would not have otherwise. And I do think it's possible. And I know for a fact that some of the groups we funded through the circle got gifts outside of that from grandma and also from all the other members' grandmas. Most of us were getting the $7,500 from our grandmothers. This was a giving circle for young Jewish philanthropists in their 20s who were like gonna be on the foundation board someday. So it was sort of like practice for us. And in that way, we were very encouraging to the applicants to be like, listen, you should like, you're applying for this grant, but like realize that all of us are going to be on the boards of foundations someday, right? And so we were very deliberate to have we did site visits, which were somewhat burdensome for the applicants, but a tremendous opportunity for the applicants, and not required. So you mentioned, so we definitely read proposals back then at Slingshot, and most of the giving circles I've partnered with, actually all of them, because of what I do, they all accept proposals. If they didn't, I don't know how I would partner with them. You mentioned earlier that some of them don't, some of the programs don't. So how are folks making decisions about where to fund if the applicants aren't given a chance to make a direct appeal?
Right. Yeah, it is a varied movement, I will say. So there are lots of different types of giving circles, from small groups of friends and family members to much larger groups with hundreds or even thousands of people pooling their money to give back together, groups that are focused on giving to their local communities across a broad range of cause areas, others that are location agnostic but giving to a particular cause or issue as a group. So lots of different ways to structure these groups, and also financial arrangements, right? So whether you're giving $100 per person every quarter or $10,000 per person every year, everything in between and beyond, all of these models are out there. And similarly, we see differences in how groups decide where to fund. So the most popular version actually is not an application-based version. It's members of the group nominate nonprofits for the group to consider. Through that nomination, then 3 are selected as finalists, and ultimately the group then gets to learn about those organizations. They can do their own research. There's typically a presentation from the member that nominated them where they can learn more, they can ask questions, and ultimately then there's a majority vote to decide which one they want to support with their funds. So in this way, actually a lot of giving circles end up funding nonprofits and sending them checks when the nonprofit never even knew they were under consideration. And part of this is to push back on some of that administrative overhead that we talked about earlier, right? Let's try and let's put the work on us to identify organizations that are doing great work, to do the research, to do the consideration on our own, get the information we need, and then just give them the money. Let's not make them spend all that time and effort doing that work. With that being said, there's certainly an opportunity and an interest from nonprofits to get in front of these giving circles that they think would be relevant to their work, right?
That is what I was going to point out. As someone who talks to fundraisers and proposal authors, and I've heard, and actually this is something Mackenzie Scott was saying for a long time, right? We don't want, until they give them the gift, right? Many of them heard on the phone they were receiving those funding. A couple things. One, the authors, at least the ones I've spoken to, which is a lot, want the opportunity to submit proposals. They are not actively looking they don't want to be cut out entirely of this process until the decision is made. They want the opportunity to advocate for themselves. Right. I think some proposal formats are burdensome, ask the same question repeatedly, right? And some of the more corporate applications now, pages and pages of demographic information that most small nonprofits don't have. Like, there's lots of ways proposals can be improved, but fundamentally they want to be able to make that case. As a savvy fundraiser in the model you described, I'm thinking about how I can get one of my board members to join this circle and nominate me and make that presentation, which is fundamentally the same thing as submitting a proposal. I'm just doing it I'm in a kind of a sneakier method, which is probably not as intended, but I need to raise money for my nonprofit. Right. So I don't have I'm not going to just sit around and wait and hope that this giving circle chooses me. Right. That a stranger nominates me. Fundraisers need to be proactive about the stuff that they are doing.
And I don't think that's a bad thing, right? When we talk to nonprofits, that is one of the things that I share with nonprofits. This is how I've seen nonprofits be successful when they do want to strategically put together a giving circle strategy. And part of that is do your research as the nonprofit. What are the giving circles that you would be a good fit for? We built the Global Giving Circle directory, and that is on the Grapevine platform. Anyone can use that and search the 3,500, 4,000 giving circles or so that we know of at this point, and find those that they think would be a good fit and find more information about them. Some of them will accept applications. A lot of them won't. But then you have something to share with those supporters, those board members, and encourage them to get involved. And the nice thing about that is that you're now, as a nonprofit, encouraging more collaboration in the sector, right? Because that board member is going to join that giving circle. Mm-hmm. They're going to connect with other donors. That's going to help bring you into that conversation. Great opportunity for you, and also great opportunity for them to build connection with other funders that also care about this community or this cause. And if they fund other things as well, that's great. Again, this is like this idea of it lifts all boats, right? Let's grow the pie. Let's approach this work from a position of abundance. And so there are strategic ways you can do this, and I think it can be very helpful for everyone, for the nonprofit, for the donor, the board member, and for the broader community.
Very good. So you also have done some fundraising. As I understand, you have recently finished a fundraising round.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So you have your money and you now spend it until it's gone. Right? That's the plan?
Something like that. Hopefully we don't spend it until it's entirely gone.
You have to spend it. I think in general they're going to want you to spend it.
Oh yes, we will. We are spending it. Don't worry about that.
So the giving circles on the platform, these are giving, it's what we would call philanthropic capital, right?
That's right.
Generally to 501c3 organizations. Although I imagine there might be some of the circles that are willing to accept other groups, possibly. At the very least, fiscally sponsored groups.
Yes. So the platform itself, right now, we facilitate donations to 501c3s, fiscally sponsored organizations. We can also support federally recognized tribes. We support quite a few of those, actually, through a few of our giving circles, and some schools and faith-based organizations as well. We, as a 501c3 public charity, have to abide by, and that essentially operates as a community donor advised fund in a sense. We have to move money to these charitable organizations that the IRS recognizes.
Yes. So the for tax reasons have to go to certain
right.
organizations. So basically the same tax reasons that a foundation has to follow.
That's right.
Considering the same sorts of organizations, right? But that's the funding that you've raised is a different kind of funding.
We've raised a few different types of funding. So building a social enterprise, as we were talking about earlier, being inspired by this idea of building a sustainable, thriving organization that has social mission at its core. Turns out our legal structure is not exactly set up for that concept in the best ways. So what we've done, like many others, is we've set up two organizations. We've set up a 501c3 public charity, and we've set up a company, a C Corp social enterprise. And these two entities allow us to, one, administer our model, but two, allow us to raise funding from different types of funders. So it gives us more optionality when we're looking at supporting our mission.
So funders that aren't, so the philanthropic funding is often required. So a foundation has to give 5% away of their endowment every year, or they lose their status.
Right.
There are a whole other class of funders, investors, who don't have to follow any of those rules, right? And you've raised some money from them, right? And they that's not because the government's requiring them to give away some of their money, right? They do it for other reasons, probably because they're expecting some money back, right? Some of your investors want a return, right? So why are investors investing in a giving circle? How are they envisioning that return coming to them?
Yeah. So on the company side, we've raised equity capital. So essentially people have given us money, invested in us. Instead of them getting a charitable tax receipt,
they own some of your company.
Then they own some of our company. Exactly. And I think what you're talking about is, what is the exit strategy, right? Like if someone owns some part of your company.
Foundations give money away without expecting it back.
Right.
Investors do not.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the foundations get the charitable tax receipt, investors own some part of your company and expect some kind of return in the future. Now, that can take many different uh, uh, models, right? So some companies will pay dividends back to their investors at some point. So they never actually sell the company and have some big exit where everyone gets some return and kind of exits their position in the company, but they make some ongoing return for that money over time. I know a number of social enterprises that have taken that route. Others are expecting more of an exit where the company is sold or goes public on the public market, right? And that's where you're essentially still selling part of your company, but to the broader public versus selling to another private company or public company, some other company that will then buy out your investment, and you get that return. So we have a variety of investors. All of them, I would say, have an impact interest, but some are heavily impact, and I don't think really have much interest in or I don't know, expectation around what the ultimate financial exit is. They see the impact that we're creating, and that is more than enough for them. For example, we've had a number of people actually take philanthropic capital that they put into a donor advised fund and then have that invested in us as equity. Now, what they're hoping, there's this really interesting model that's been built around this by a lot of impact investors. There's a group in the DC area called Impact Assets that does this, has been leading the charge on this. I would say, I'm sure with many others. I'm not as immersed in the space.
Believe it or not, they submitted a proposal to me once.
Okay, well there you go.
Well over 1,000 we've read. It's hard to mention anything I've not read one of their proposals. Surprised I haven't read over to yours.
Well, you think about a foundation, right? You take money that has been donated and you invest it. To your point earlier, Harvard is spending how much to all of these investors to invest their endowment to grow it over time? Well, what if that money, that $50 billion, isn't just invested in whatever it is, but is invested in social enterprises, things that are also creating social change while
Some
that
of
money's
it's
being
invested in Chevron as well.
Sure. So what I'm saying is you could take that money and invest it in a company like Grapevine instead. And hey, we're going to turn that money into more giving circles and more philanthropy and more social impact across the country. And the
But it was money that was
originally get a return.
Originally for philanthropic purposes, and you have a philanthropic arm. Why switch it over if the impact is more than enough for these investors?
That's a great question. So we have gone into the philanthropic arm. Others have gone into the company, primarily a timing issue. We started with the company first. We didn't have our nonprofit set up at that point. So they donated through their donor advised fund and then had that invested in us. And then we have others that have done straight investment in the company. So they are looking for a return. And what we have talked about there is the big opportunity here to build a collaborative, collective giving movement across the country and globally. And we're providing infrastructure and tools for that for free. We're a tip-based model, so anyone can start or join a giving circle on our platform for free. But they have the option to leave us a tip, and that goes to support our operations. And increasingly, as we keep growing this movement, we have companies and foundations and others coming to us saying, hey, we want your help also starting a giving circle or creating a team-based giving model. And so as we do more of that type of work, there's other opportunities for us to earn income from companies, foundations with budgets. So what I see is us continuing to grow this movement, and at some point, I think it does make sense that we could end up merging with some of these bigger platforms, other platforms, to create an even larger sort of more accessible model for more people to get involved in the movement. And that would, if that were to happen, that would be a kind of return where there would be some kind of merger and return for investors.
There was a press release I was able to find from one of your investors, and it was largely what you just said. And I thank you very much for further explaining it to me, because it is, and I read these often, and often I have initiated some pivots. I've made it very clear to people that philanthropic funding is going to be way too difficult for them to get to achieve their goals. And one thing I will say about venture capitalists is that they are often more approachable. Not necessarily approachable, but more approachable than foundations, which are some of the least approachable people in the world,
Yeah.
And they kind of have to be.
Yeah.
I've been in their shoes a few times.
I agree. I think it's been a lot easier for us to get that kind of capital early on to start something. And there's been a lot more trust in, we're just going to invest in you and this idea and give us some time and space to figure it out and figure out something wholly new. I mean, we're bringing the Giving Circle movement online for the first time, right? It's a whole new thing. And I think the philanthropic capital world, at least my experience of it has been less risk taking than that. And so it's been harder. We've actually had to prove ourselves more over the last few years to where now we're getting some of these bigger foundations to say, okay, great, we'd like to give you some funding to continue and expand this work.
So I guess for me, right, and I spent a lot of time trying to think about like what's the right type of funding for this particular proposal that I'm reading now. And I do think it can be a huge challenge to have different types of funding because you've got more than one bottom line amongst the folks who have given you money and are expecting something, right? The foundations that gave you money are expecting you to grow a Giving Circle movement. The investors, they definitely started with that in their press releases, but it got to a section. It was why we're giving them money, and that was about what you were mentioning with the fee. Basically, millennials are more likely to pay the tip when they donate online. And so they're thinking that this is, as you put more Giving Circles onto your platform, they're going to be able to, and this is like it's the modern American dream, right? It's also the plot to Superman 3. I make a little bit of money, and Office Space and some other things. I make a little bit of money every time there's a transaction.
Yeah.
Right. And that's different from a funder who might see tremendous potential in Giving Circles and is funding for the reason because they want to see, for instance, more local, like more organized local funding.
Sure.
And then one of the things that I find very curious and actually very interested to know, has a Giving Circle ever funded Grapevine?
No. We've never asked a Giving Circle for funding. We've had lots of our Giving Circle members fund Grapevine directly, but not as a Giving Circle.
I enjoyed participating in the circle. Here's a donation.
That's right.
Do you ask for those after folks participate?
We did one ask at the end of last year when we launched the foundation for the first time, and actually,
hard to get money if you don't ask. I'm not trying to.
Right. So we hadn't asked prior.
I don't ask for money enough for I have thousands of volunteers, and I appreciate that they're volunteering, and I don't like to ask them for money. Yeah. They're like the only ones who ever would donate to me. So I really probably, if you're listening now, consider this. We have a donate button, or you could join a Giving Circle and nominate unfunded list. Right, and then but I personally, I don't think a Giving Circle would ever choose to fund unfunded list. I'm pretty familiar with the kind of folks who do fund us. When I was at Slingshot, a Giving Circle, we had funders, but they were all gifts from people who had participated. And after the fact, we would never, as a circle, decide to fund another circle. But obviously, Giving Circle programs need funding. This is why you exist. There's an administrative burden.
Yeah.
It's a curious challenge that the funding movement you seek to grow will not fund the movement seeking to grow it.
Yeah, I think that is changing a bit though, because I think part of that is building this concept of a movement. What we've discovered as we've been doing this work over the last 3 or 4 years is that a lot of people didn't realize that there were other Giving Circles like theirs. They thought, oh, we're just this one group in Philadelphia. We didn't know that there are thousands of these groups across the country. So I think as we've started to build more awareness and connection and community around this, an understanding of what the broader mission is and the opportunity to diversify and democratize philanthropy through this model, more people are getting excited about that and wanting to not only participate in it in their local context or with their particular Giving Circle, whatever it's focused on, but also wanting to support the broader movement. And essentially, I mean, that's what we're asking when people make their donation through us and leave a tip. And we are getting tips from people. And then we are getting people who are making those individual contributions to us when we've asked. Like I said, we've only asked that one time for our community, but now we're starting to make bigger asks. And we've been looking at foundations, but it's actually an interesting thing that you've just surfaced for us to think about. Like, what would it look like for us to ask our Giving Circles, would you consider one of your grant cycles going to the foundation for this particular initiative?
I would be cautious about cannibalization with that.
Yeah, there you go.
In fact, there'd be no way to do that without there being some cannibalization.
And I think for us, so much of our work is about building this community and this spirit. We really shy away from anything that might feel, we wouldn't want the nonprofits in this community or that giving circle to feel like we're taking money away from their local, mission, whatever it is that they're trying to fund. So even for our tip, for example, none of that comes out of the donation. It's on top of, it's separate from it, and that's up to you to leave. But we don't want that cannibalization concern to creep in for people. So
there are an increasing number of, I'll use the term gatekeepers. No, that's not right. Some of them are kind of gatekeepers. But there's an increasing number of platforms and groups who have sort of inserted themselves into the fundraising atmosphere. I have a donate button on my website. You can donate to Unfunded List. And you can pull your phone out right now and do it. Right? And so I appreciate some of these platforms that exist for gathering the money and sending it to me. My least favorite would be there's some that do corporate giving programs, right? And honestly, it's just very untoward. So those corporations could just give what they do is they go into the company and they say, hey, we're going to make it very easy for you to give to these nonprofits. It's already, again, I have a donation button on my website. I don't need anybody's help to receive a donation from a company. Right? But these companies have done a very good job of coming in there and saying, we're going to do your workplace giving program for you.
Right.
And they make money off of holding on to my check for a very long time. I get these things 9 months after they're issued.
Wow.
And that's only because I bother them quite a bit. Right? So I do wonder, hopefully, right, that we're doing some quick disbursements here, right? And right, as you're thinking about your administrative burden, in many ways, getting a gift from a giving circle is easier for the fundraisers, but sometimes it can be difficult. And as a fundraiser, I have sometimes been resentful of folks who have, without asking me, inserted themselves into my fundraising. Lots of these nonprofits have professional fundraisers who would like to run their fundraising programs. And you've got corporate programs where some corporate managers giving the presentation about the nonprofit that they founded without them in the room, right? Or the same might be happening at a giving circle. Yep. And these are some of the, and again, this is the primary group I talk to, struggling fundraisers. So I will always think about I also think about the members of the giving circle, right? Yeah. And they don't necessarily want to talk to professional fundraisers. So
right, protecting their time.
I understand, because if you're talking to me, I might get a gift out of you.
Yeah. Well, look, I think if
good
done
at what I
well, these platforms, these almost intermediary players bring a lot of value, right? They can facilitate some of these things well. Now, in some cases, if they're holding on to your money for 9 months, for example, that's not really creating value for the system.
So I no longer participate in workplace matching programs because it's not worth my. This is free money and it's not worth my time to go after because they make it too difficult.
Yeah. Which
is by design. They know enough people will get frustrated or not have the time or not have the staff, and they end up keeping money that's supposed to be donated to places.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I think part of our model too, because we're pooling money, it's these larger amounts that go, and our giving circles know where the money goes, and they're often in touch with these nonprofits. So if we're not getting that money out the door, they're calling us. I saw Jane at the grocery store, and she says she hasn't gotten her check yet.
No, that's
so there's a real.
That's general. So the company is Benevity.
Yeah.
I don't mind talking about them. I have to. The employee. Some of my volunteers work places where they can get their gift matched if they give through their workplace giving program. So they'll do it that way, and they don't always tell me that if they don't tell me that they've done that, I don't know because they don't.
Right.
They don't
know
ever
to
tell
go
me.
check.
No,
Right.
And I'm expected to sign up for all of these platforms. Every time there's a new platform, I'm expected to spend a bunch of time signing up for it, even before there are any donations for me.
Yeah.
Right. And it's it is, and I see them just coming out, and I don't see a whole lot of criticism of it.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I would say if you're running a company and you want to get your employees engaged in giving, you should start a giving circle. You shouldn't work with some other purely. Benevity has no 501c3 arm. No. They're an international company. They know better than to be based in the U.S. Quite frankly, they're really not making it easier for people to give at work. It was easy to give at work.
Yeah.
When I was at Seed Foundation, I was in charge of the combined federal campaign. That's some of the easiest money I ever raised because the check just arrived, right? And these things can certainly happen, but you need to think about not just the donors, not just the administrative, not just the company, but the target funders. And if you're going to have thousands of different giving circles. That means you're going to have lots of different kinds of fundraisers and expectations and needs. I have seen organizations fold before the grant arrived because the grant took too long
Wow.
to get cut and sent out.
See, we do monthly granting for that reason, because we talk about giving circles as being a high velocity model. Money in, money out. Most of these groups are operating on a cycle. So they're doing this every 3 months, sometimes every month. We need to keep getting the money out because we need to keep them giving, and that's how the model works. It's not like a DAF or one of these other models where you might park money for years at a time. So we've built everything to really facilitate that and keep that money flowing into the community and keep that reporting back to those donors so that they're feeling good about that and keep their velocity of giving up.
Okay. I am going to ask you just a few more questions.
Okay.
We've been talking for an hour and 30 minutes about giving circles and philanthropy and lots of other stuff. Thank you, everyone who's been listening this long. And thank you, Emily. It's been very interesting. I've been learning a lot. As someone who reads lots of different grant proposals, every time I read one, I have to go look something up. I've never been able to read a grant proposal where I understood everything that was in there and I didn't need to do a lot of extra research. And I'm pretty good at researching nonprofits. I've been doing it for a long time. Do you think, is someone with absolutely no philanthropy experience who's just first time joined a giving circle, what sort of education do they need in order to be an effective giver? Or can the average American just start giving right now without any extra training?
Just get started. I always like to say, just get started. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just get involved. And I think a giving circle is a really great on-ramp for a lot of people who are in that place. I think it's a great complement to a lot of people who have much more robust giving already in their lives. It's a great way to expand their portfolio of giving approaches, both to amplify their impact and their education, their connection with others. But if you're just starting out, talking to a philanthropic advisor might not be the first thing on your list, right? Especially if you don't have a certain amount of resources that you're looking to give away. And I think if you join a giving circle, what we've seen is it can be a really enjoyable and comfortable way to learn through others. Other people are nominating organizations, talking about causes that they think are important, why they think this organization is doing great work. So it's a great way to discover organizations and also to learn how others think about impact and what's valuable for that particular community or that cause, whatever the giving circle focus might be around. So I definitely think it's a great way to get involved, to learn, and through that, what we often see with giving circles is that people then get excited about a particular organization or a particular initiative and go deeper, right? So then you can use that as a jumping off point to maybe volunteering or donating to an organization directly, even going on to becoming a board member and just continuing to deepen and expand your experience in philanthropy through a variety of ways. So definitely think it's a great place to just get started. I don't think you need to do any research before you join a group other than to find the one that feels like a good fit for you. And we at Grapevine, and there are other providers as well that have lots of good resources for people to get started. So how do you think about nominating a nonprofit for your group if that's their model? Where do you find great nonprofits? What are questions you might ask when nonprofits are being presented and you're trying to make a decision? So lots of good resources like that on our platform and others that you can use in the process of learning while doing, basically, as you join one of these.
But surely there are some things that would make one a better giver. Being knowledgeable about your community, being connected enough into your community to be able to nominate nonprofits.
Sure. Yeah.
Like being aware of the issue that's being funded. Like if you didn't understand climate change and you're funding climate change organizations.
Yeah.
One of the organizations that raises a lot of money every year is a group dedicated to curing autism, which is not something that doctors think is necessary or possible, but they raise a lot of money every year because they're talking about finding the cure. Right. So there are, and ask any professional program officer, there are bad nonprofits that write good proposals and have good fundraising programs, and there are great nonprofits that write bad proposals and have bad fundraising programs.
Right.
Right. So, I like the idea of get started. I learned by doing myself.
Right.
but this is something you can get better at.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I'm trying to make the case of. Just get started, but then use these resources that are out there and engage with the others in the group, right? A big part of the value of a group of people is there are lots of people who know a lot. There are lots of people who've been doing this for years and have nonprofits they can bring to the table, have knowledge and experience they can share. And if you're not one of those, how fortunate for you that you get to learn through them, right? And how fortunate for them that they get to share that with you and with others who care and help inform the next generation. So this community-based model really does facilitate a lot of that learning, I think, in a really effective way, while making impact, learning while doing.
I personally stopped participating in giving circles because I found myself too influential. I am a professional fundraiser. I knew lots about nonprofits. I wrote and read grant proposals all the time. Every time I went to the Giving Circle meeting, we would end up funding exactly what I wanted to and not what I didn't. And I enjoyed having that level of power and authority, but I also noticed that like other people who were trying to like just get into it, I found myself steam, and I cared very much. It wasn't something I was going to like let us give a grant to a crappy nonprofit that wrote a bad proposal just because, right, we're letting someone have some experience, right? I joined because I wanted them to go to the best place. But I appreciate what you're saying. I am sure, and I've heard it from lots of them, that those folks learned from me in those conversations, and I was, and maybe I should still, maybe I'll join another one.
Well, and that's it too. You can always join a different one, right?
Is there? So I think if you've never done this before, I think you probably should join one with folks that have some experience, people who have read some proposals and know a little bit about. Preferably somebody who's worked at a nonprofit should be there who understands the day-to-day work, because I think if you've never actually done it, then there's no way you could understand. But for me, it became very apparent some of the power dynamic issues that we were having there, and I'm sure that must be happening at Grapevine. You have, I assume, like methodologies and best practices for like building consensus and that sort of stuff.
We do, and we have some great training, great workshops for our leaders on how to build consensus, how to set values for your giving circle, how to identify and consider nonprofits. So there's lots of resources there for the leaders, but also more broadly for the members as well. So
the Slingshot Fund Giving Circles was the most prolific that I participated in. We gave $500,000 a year to 10 different organizations, so 10 $50,000 grants.
Right.
In order to apply for those, you had to first get into the Slingshot Guide, which was a book that we published every year, and we gave it to all the major Jewish foundations for free. Here's your Slingshot Guide. These are the 50 Jewish organizations that we, young Jews, think are the most promising. And actually, they got most of the funding from that program came from giving the guide for free to foundations, because then they would learn about it.
Yeah.
But in the circle, we would inevitably be that every year that we were giving 10 grants and saying no to 40 organizations. And I one year, so it was always like, so we had more than 10 members. So it was, so signing up for the really fun call, we're giving you $50,000, right? Those slots would get filled quickly. Yeah. There'd usually be like two people making the call, which was weird. I remember one time I did it and we like went back and forth with the words. It was like I said congratulations, and then they said it's actually very hard to have two people make that announcement.
Yeah.
No one would ever want to sign up for the declination calls.
Yeah. It's like the Oscars, when you have the two people and they have to announce the Oscar, and it's always
similar.
Awkward because who says it, who gets to say congratulations, who gets.
And they would show you the other considered folks there, and you get to see their disappointment or whatever. Generally, the best practice with, I think, probably giving circles and other things is that if you reject someone's application, and again, they don't always know that they're being considered with your group, so this wouldn't come up. But assuming it's a program where they do know they've applied,
right?
In general, giving feedback to someone who's been rejected by a giving circle is very hard, because you didn't get it because those particular individuals chose other programs. That's the reason. And without being in that room, you're never going to find out. And even if you were in that room to find out, that probably wouldn't be that useful information to you anyway. So the big program that I've come up with on Unfunded List is co-review. I can review with any program that is accepting proposals. Currently, we work with this big international platform, and we read mostly international proposals. A lot of the domestic U.S. proposals that we've read have come through co-review partnerships with giving circles, which I really enjoy. These particular giving circles have been a lot of first-time philanthropists and a lot of first-time grantees. So these are folks who are learning about philanthropy. So it was a great way for us to come in and do our very robust program of thoroughly reviewing all of the applications, so that even the rejected folks at these giving circles still get quite a bit of discussion and are able to decide, right, are able to improve their applications. We had several with our first Next Gen Giving Circle partnership. Several folks rejected the first year, were able to get grants the second year, which is quite the achievement. However, those members were different. Like a lot of it is just sort of up in the air. And so, right, I can never tell somebody you didn't get this grant because you didn't do X, Y, Z. I've never, in over 1,000 proposals, never been able to do that. Much more of a lengthy, nuanced process, which is what tells me this is an important thing to do. Particularly for the authors, they're very, very interested in receiving this feedback. I think it would be impossible for giving circles to give feedback to every single group that was on their radar during the process, right? So I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about the declination process, or the just the potential for the independent review of folks considered by giving circles.
And do you mean of the organ, when you say of folks considered by giving circles, do you mean the organizations generally, or by a particular proposal from them? So an independent review of the folks considered by giving circles, I think is what you asked. So I'm wondering if you're an independent review of an application.
A giving circle does their process, which naturally, and I understand that the process can be done many, many different ways, but certain things will always be true. There were a certain number of groups considered, and some of those groups considered did not get grants.
Right.
And the giving circle itself probably can't explain why. Power dynamics, various other reasons.
Right.
So the result, and this is true not just for giving circles, for foundations, for government programs, for individual funders, for everybody, is that the vast majority of those considered groups receive nothing.
Right. So how do you communicate some kind of feedback
to them? So how do
you,
and I believe I can do it to everybody, right? And I'm curious on your thoughts on that. If you've seen any of the giving circles do similar programs. When I signed up to do all 40 declination calls that round, people thought I was crazy. It was one of the most educational experiences of my life, I'll say. Those calls were very difficult, but we were able to turn them into real stuff on certain occasions. Like a couple times I just introduced them to other members of the giving circle, because I knew they liked that nonprofit because I was there in the room. And I also knew that they're about to join the board. They have other things that they can do for them.
Right.
But the standard practice in a lot of philanthropy is we deal with the grantees and not everybody else.
Yeah, so I think in the giving circle model, there's this sense that you want to be supportive of everyone, even if not everyone gets the large grant that quarter. One, those others might get the larger grant next quarter, right? If it's a quarterly group, or the next cycle, whatever that cycle cadence is. But secondly, I think within the giving circle movement, there is a real attention to how else can we help? And are there other ways that the 5 T's we often talk about in philanthropy, right? And so I always forget all of them, but it's time, treasure, talent, testimony, and ties. There we go, got all 5. And so there are more ways than just your treasure, than just your money, that you can support organizations. And so often giving circles will encourage members to volunteer or raise awareness about this organization, for example, with others that they think might be interested. We also often see giving circle members who learn about an organization through the giving circle, even if it doesn't get the larger grant, become very inspired by it and go on to become direct donors. And a lot of our giving circles encourage members to donate directly to those others that did not receive the larger grant, if they're so moved to, right? And one of the nice things with the Grapevine platform is we make that a lot easier for people, because we surface all of those nonprofits and pages where you can easily donate to them right there in their giving circle homepage. So I think there's a lot of attention to wanting to make sure that those nonprofits still have some support in some capacity. Not as much on the feedback part, especially I think a lot of these groups that don't have an application process where there's been a full discussion and sort of tally and maybe metrics of some kind that they're building a case for certain nonprofit recipients that they can then go back to have a feedback conversation with nonprofits. So I do think it's an area for further exploration. Maybe I'm sure there's more that could be done for those organizations.
One of the things that we've done, even with groups that do not accept proposals, just because the groups are considering, just because they're not, so just because that particular grant maker is not accepting proposals, doesn't mean that their groups they're considering have never written one.
Yeah.
In my experience, most nonprofits have a proposal
right.
sitting there.
Right.
So what we've done with some groups, so we got maybe the proposal, the Giving Circle is reading is kind of short, or they're only looking at the website or other information. We give all of their applicants, everybody who was considered, the opportunity to have any of the proposals they've written reviewed. And it's lots of very good stuff comes out of it. Sometimes we convince them to stop fundraising at all because they're wasting. Because many of these folks, I'm sure you've seen, are wasting their time.
Yeah.
And they don't like for me to come in there and tell them that, but they would have continued to waste their time for much longer if I hadn't. So I'm generally fine with it.
Yeah.
And often they do come back later and thank me once they've had their successful change and they realize that no one was telling them the truth for a very long
that's
time.
the tough feedback is the most valuable because a lot of people do just avoid it. So
I think some of my experience in ballet actually was helpful for that. One of our larger partnerships was with the Solve program at MIT, and Alex Emily was also a ballet dancer. And she said she once told me that I reminded her of one of her ballet instructors, and he was, of course, the meanest, like the one that was always telling her what she was doing wrong, right? But if you don't, someone has to tell you what you're doing wrong.
Right.
I do it with what I call loving language.
Oh, good.
And I've gotten very good at delivering candid feedback, and we have a process for it, and it's very thoughtful. I do not recommend to, especially a Giving Circle made up of beginners, to go and talk to everybody that declined and just sort of. And
right.
I think it would go very poorly.
Yeah.
This is difficult stuff.
Yeah.
I do it independently. I'm not the one to turn them down. So in fact, oftentimes I can be like, I think the Giving Circle made a mistake. I read all the submissions and I think your proposal was better, right? If I actually believe that, I will tell them that, right? I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the problems with Giving Circles for folks who have stayed with us this long, right? Many of the Giving Circles that I've interacted with personally have run into troubles at various times. One of the original board members of Unfunded used to run something called the Giving Circles Fund, which is, as far as I can tell, previous iteration of Grapevine, which didn't last very long. Right. I forget how long it was around, but it's no longer around. The Giving Circle that I cut my teeth on, Slingshot Fund, no longer around. Even though the organization still exists, the Giving Circle is gone. Next Gen Giving Circle has been fun to read with, but I think perhaps now that they're on Grapevine, this may change. But they certainly weren't doing it every month or every quarter, right? Because this was younger next gen members, they needed to constantly find new members. They didn't always have enough people to do a circle, right? A lot of those, the age-based ones will naturally turn over. People always get older. It's something that just always happens. I did some facilitating for teen Giving Circles for a while, and those were always faith-based through the temple, right? So they had the bar mitzvah class that they were replaced with it. Right? If you didn't have that, how are you trying to find 13-year-olds to join the Giving Circle every year would be impossible. So they can not necessarily long-term sustainable funders.
Right.
They can dissolve quickly, which can be there could be grantees relying on on getting that funding. That could be a hit every year. Of course, individuals can be flimsy, foundations can be flimsy. Corporate grant programs are certainly not something that you can rely on, but I think we can agree that Giving Circles are not permanent bodies taking long views of history, right? Like the many nonprofits are. So how do we deal with the relative impermanence of these circles? So I think you're doing some of it by relieving the administrative burden. That's a lot of them fold because they realize how much work it was.
Work it is,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
But even beyond that, there's still other things that can, right? There's the personality disputes is probably the main
Yeah.
And I don't see how that's just going to happen. I think
Right.
these things are just going to fold.
Yeah.
Family foundations, for all their problems, families don't like break apart that often.
Yeah.
Right? They're still good. Like the money's in the fund. It's required to be given out. As difficult as they are to approach, like they're going to be there. And many of those foundations have been there for a long time, and that has allowed institutions like libraries, colleges, universities, dance halls, opera houses, and things to exist. Right. And that's really that long-term view of funding is the only type of funding that would create institutions of that sort.
Right, which has its own challenges, like we were talking about earlier, right? You set up these institutions to be around forever. They're around for a long time, but they're not so flexible, and it's hard to break into them, and all these other issues are with that. So, all of these models have their own pros and cons, for sure. Giving circles, yes, certainly. I think it's easier to spin one up. You can start one on Grapevine in a couple of minutes. It's just as easy for that one to be shut down, right? I think you're right. Like for us, a big part of bringing some more sustainability to this movement and growth to it is automating away a lot of the administrative headaches, taking away a lot of those challenges, making it very easy for anyone to set one of these up and do it without needing to set up their own nonprofit and track everyone's donations through some complex spreadsheet model they've built and all of this other stuff. So we've automated away a lot of that. And also, I think the other kind of nice point about that is what we've seen with some of the research is that about every 3 to 4 years or so, a giving circle hits a moment of riskiness. It's kind of at risk, I would say, about every 3 or 4 years based on the research, which is when natural kind of leadership change tends to happen. This is on average. I'm sure for some it's less.
Slingshot lasted 4 years. No, I did it for 4 years. It was around before that, though.
Okay. So, but there's that moment where, okay, the leaders are getting tired and someone else needs to step up.
Having done it for 4 years myself, I can say like some of it was I was too bossy, and I noticed myself doing that. But others, it was just sort of particularly because we were age based. I was turning 30 and figured I would let other folks take over. No one did. Like everybody, they ended up increasing the age limit, which I actually think is a smart. If you started a giving circle, right, and when you were young, and you end up liking it, it's okay to remove the age limit because you are that old.
Grow together, keep it going. Absolutely.
Young Presidents Organization did that when they started. It was the founders were under 30, and then they turned 30, and they were like, all right, let's 30. And now 40. It's young presidents are all the way up to 55 years old.
Love it.
But it would have been arbitrary to when they founded it, they had that in common.
Right.
They're still all the same age that have the same thing. It would be very weird to disband, because of that. So I think they can change. I think after 4 years, it would make a lot of sense to think about fundamental changes to the structure.
Yeah, and I think
which would be easier at a giving circle than at a foundation.
I think it is. I think it's also easier now with tools like Grapevine, where before, if you had some complex system of things that you were using to facilitate donations, track money, and you had to spend a week training someone on how to do it and giving them all the access to all the records, that's a lot to go through. Whereas if it's just, hey, we're going to, with one click, change you from a member of this group to a leader of this group on the Grapevine platform, all the history is there, everything is turnkey, it's all in one place. We've had a number of giving circles tell us that has made their transition possible because others weren't so overwhelmed by it, and it just made it so much more seamless. So hopefully as we get better, grapevine.org is the first online platform for giving circles. So we're, really trying to be that infrastructure partner for the movement to make this easy for anyone. But I'm sure we'll continue to get better. The movement will continue to grow, and these things will be simpler over time. And there's a lot of support around the programming side too, right? It's not just a technical issue. It's also a people issue. I mean, founder dynamics, as you talked about, relationships and training, all of that. So there are more and more resources around those types of things too, and how to navigate those conversations. So I do hope that we will see more and more longevity within giving circles on average because of all of these advances. And I do think we'll continue to see more and more giving circles. We're launching new ones every week. We have almost 1,000 giving circles on our platform. We're in every state across the country. We've moved $28 million now from 60,000 people in these groups across the country. And as we continue to grow that movement, while one giving circle might at some point churn, and that's okay. Those people can take forward those learnings. We're seeing more members start their own giving circles after being in one because they're inspired and now they have a different idea of a particular cause or a different community they want to go through this model with. So I do believe that there's a natural lifetime to some of these, and that's fine, and that the ripple effects of people starting their own new ones, people joining other ones, all of that's valuable. And for a nonprofit, the challenging part, of course, is like finding the next one. Okay, if this one's gone, now what do I do? And I'm hoping that's another role that Grapevine can really play for those nonprofits that are being really thoughtful and saying, what is our giving circle strategy? How do we get started this year? Maybe you're looking ahead to 24. This is a movement and this is growing, and we need to have a strategy related to this. So maybe this year our strategy is getting in front of more giving circles, bringing this to our donors, as you mentioned earlier, and encouraging them to join these few that we think are relevant, starting to build those relationships. Maybe next year we want to expand upon that and go further afield with our research and try to find more organizations. Maybe that's just our giving circles. Maybe that's just part of our annual strategy, right? Because we know some will cycle out, new ones will come in, so we're always looking for new ones. And then finally, maybe at some point we're going to start giving circles ourselves because we can actually leverage this model to build communities of donors to support our work directly. So I think it's an evolving landscape in summary.
Do you think that giving circles can be strategic actors? So let's take climate change, for instance. I know many donors who tell me that they are concerned with climate change. And I say, yes, I also would like to be alive.
Yes, fair. I can
Right.
join you on that.
For my entire life, we've known about climate change. I remember for a while it was called acid rain. It was global warming. We call it different things. But like my whole life, I remember one of my first giving experiences was organizing one of the first recycling drives in my hometown. It's obviously very difficult to solve a problem like climate change.
Yes.
I don't want to make light of it, but for instance, one of your earlier examples, giving a scholarship to someone to attend school is terrific, but a fairly simple form of philanthropy, right? You're going to find the best student to give them, right? How are you going to solve, how are you going to give a grant to solve climate change,
Right.
Or income inequality,
Yeah.
or there's lots of intractable issues,
Sure.
right? If we wanted to make a list, I'm sure it would be a long list, right? And so when I say strategic grant maker, I mean like I'm going to use my money to purchase. This is some social change I want to make in the world, very clearly defined, and I want to purchase it with dollars. Right? It's not like general giving back or a sense of charity or any of those which are all wonderful things, but like a very strategic approach. Do you think are giving circles a tool for that?
Absolutely. How?
Yes, how? Because I like giving circles, but I also like to try to see both sides of things.
Sure.
And I think generally everything's neutral, right? So you could have a bunch of evil members of a giving circle they could be giving to Stormfront and whatever the clan is called now, right? And the NRA, and they could be having harm.
Right? Sure, it's just a tool, and it needs some direction.
Just like a hammer, right? I can use a hammer to build or destroy. It's actually a little bit easier to destroy.
Everything. It's always easier to destroy than to build. But yes, I do think they can be very strategic. So one, I see a number of giving circles now inviting in subject matter experts to help inform their giving, help them identify what are the most pressing issues in our community, what are some of the best interventions to solving those issues. So just because the givers themselves don't necessarily have all of the knowledge and aren't the experts themselves doesn't mean that they don't learn from others and don't engage others in that process of deciding where money goes. And I think one of the interesting things that I started to see as larger donors are getting involved in this collaborative giving space. So you can think of Blue Meridian or some of these other larger funder collaboratives where people with big dollars are coming together to collaborate, and they are pulling in experts to help inform them. And actually, the biggest funders, Melinda Gates, just launched a collaborative giving fund as well. And her whole point is these are big problems that go beyond even what we can do as Melinda Gates, as the Gates Foundation. We need to collaborate with others. And so we're going to put together a collaborative where we are going to pool our knowledge, our networks, our money, and learn together and make decisions together and fun together. So to me, it's the same thing. It's the scale. Sure. I mean, are you putting in, $100 million, or are you putting in $100? This makes a difference. And then how much expertise, how much learning are you injecting into the process? Those are decisions every Giving Circle makes. And we have some that keep it very, very lightweight and others that get very deep. But I think it's actually a very effective model for facilitating collaboration and what I think we need a lot more of in order to actually be impactful and solve some of these big challenges.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you would like to say to the audience, to the folks, before they, I don't know, go on? They probably have fallen asleep by now.
We were talking for a while.
No, a lot of people listen at work, and actually I've been told like they could be longer. Right?
Oh, wow.
Because they're at work.
It's on the background.
But for the folks who have listened this long, do you have any final, particularly valuable pieces of wisdom? I'd like to reward folks who make it all the way to the end.
I think that to me, giving circles are a great form of this collaborative giving movement that really has a place for everyone. So, I would be remiss if I didn't end by saying that I think everyone has a place in this Giving Circle movement, and whether you want to find and join one or start your own, we at grapevine.org are happy to be a support for you and help you do that. So please do reach out to us, find us there. And if you are a funder with larger financial means and you're thinking about how to make an impact, we're also working with more of these foundations to start larger Giving Circles or even provide matching funds through Giving Circle networks so that you can get your money out through communities across the country. So there's a place for everyone, and I know we've already talked about the nonprofit involvement and really wanting, my message for nonprofits is just, this is a movement and it's growing. And so you need to have a Giving Circle strategy. And you don't need to be getting money from a Giving Circle this year, but you need to be learning about it and thinking about it and getting a strategy together. I think this really is going to be a much bigger, increasingly large part of philanthropy. And so if that's something that we can help you with as well, we have some resources on the platform, but I think, just getting involved and starting to follow this movement is a great place to start.
One final question.
Yes.
What if they're in a triangle? Or like a square?
We're fine with all shapes and sizes.
Any shape?
We'll accept all of them.
I can start a Giving Octagon if I want.
You may. You can start the Giving Octagon on Grapevine.
The Giving Dodecahedron.
Sure.
All right.
We will not discriminate. You are all welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here in your office and for talking to me about Giving Circles for a good long while.